You know. Great. Cool. You are set to go.
You all good? Do you need anything else?
Nope. All is well. Get out of here.
Have a great meeting.
Get back to work. Yeah, we basically got a camera, so like people would, you know, exciting in. It is however like 5:30. Yeah. I have my way. Hello. Okay.
Yeah, it was great. We really had a Abruzzo. It's 2 hours east of Rome toward the other coast. It's West North Carolina.
I know.
Actually, it's a lot more like Colorado. Pretty big mountains, but small towns, villages, a few big cities. We have friends that got into this craze that apparently I would have never heard about it if they had done it. But you can buy houses in Abruzzo for cheap and keep it as a vacation place, Airbnb it, whatever. So they invited us to come see their place they bought. So yeah, we were with them the whole time. They showed us around. They took us to the Adriatic, did bike ride on the coast, hiking little villages, you know, mountaintop villages with a castle in the middle, just idyllic. So yeah. I don't think so. Oh, I'm sorry. The way you said it, his last name, maybe I've never. I have never heard it pronounced correctly, probably. Or like I think I hear it in my head, and I've never I've met him yet. I know who he is. Yeah.
But like the day that I was eventually building everything with those.
Oh yeah.
In process of migration, like more permanent home.
Yeah.
I didn't think like opening up invitation like
it's amazing these tiny villages, they've got fiber internet. You walk down to like the local cafe in the morning, it's like, oh, €1 for a latte. It's like, so no wonder all these retirees are like buying a $40,000 ruin and like get it fixed up by a local builder. buddy would go, your retirement buddy would like triple or quadruple as far as like, you know.
Yeah, still, Christy and I went on our honeymoon place in South Central.
Yeah.
And then that was like,
hey.
Like ruins. It was,
yeah.
Improved on the things that got by some people that were born there, but
yeah. Delivery. Yeah, so that's kind of what I was curious about. I mean, it was probably a varied set of responses, but this village that they bought in, like we walked around and met locals. They're like, we're so glad that you guys are doing this. Well, it's like our village was dying, like before you showed up.
They were like that. They didn't. Years ago, people were big stuff about it.
Yeah.
Because we're having their houses that have been families or whatever, and granted, they didn't want to keep it up.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
But
yeah,
it's sort of like a very good feeling. Like,
yeah.
Renewing place, but then the people that are trying to have it.
Yeah. So it seems like, at least in this part of Italy, most like people in their late 20s, 30s, 40s have 2 or 3 places they own because their parents grew up there in village life. When they were born, maybe dad or mom got a job in a bigger city, so they moved. But like grandma and grandpa, like who grew up in that village, like owned multiple things. And so as they pass away, like basically all this property is just coming down through the generations. So we met a guy who has 3 places.
Oh, well.
Yeah, I'll go around the side.
It's the exact same thing.
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
That's what I was telling.
Yeah.
I don't think you have an invitation.
No. Yeah, we did do that.
Yeah. So yeah. Anyway, we're just. Hey, finally we see each other. Good to see you again, sir. We just decided to. I mean, it should be on the side. Oh no, I just mean I was like screens behind me. And I was sitting right here. Sides are fine.
Okay, we'll figure it out. Like, nobody's shy about being able to say which thing's there. So.
Well, I've already heard 2 people ask about it this morning disparately, so I don't know who put it on the agenda, but which one? Cutting a new release.
I mean,
you just said it, and then somebody else in the hallway was like, so when is that?
And if we're mostly in agreement on things, maybe we can do that. If we're mostly in agreement on things.
oh.
It's a big small thing.
Phil.
They bet you get to get us heard there.
Oh man.
Pretty confusing finding that.
Yeah, and even better is like the 3-0 whatever, because like I was like, oh, escalator, and it was like, no, you must take the elevator now. Like, I was like,
there's
oh,
another floor. It's elevator
yeah.
only. Wonderful.
And it was like, because I got up here and I was like, where the fuck is 3? And they're like, still up.
I have not had to do that, but I try to work from there later. So sure should down. Hey, buddy. How is your place?
Oh, it's good. Okay. So people online, can y'all hear me? Maybe we're not live yet. Well, it's not because we have this, but I just don't know if this is. Oh, well, we have 4 mics total. Hello, hello. Okay, so now I'm hot in the room. Bracken, can you hear me? I see somebody looking at the screen. Can you hear me? Hello, hello. If you're connecting online, can you tell me if you hear us? Give a thumbs up or just. So I'm actually up on the screen. Maybe I don't need to do that.
Yes, are we all supposed to turn on our camera?
Well, they've actually got they're not showing it on this display, but there's actually like a room camera. So the red light, so we don't have to have on our laptops per se. I'm seeing, but I just don't know if people can hear me online yet.
I can't hear you.
Oh, you can. Okay. Well, then everybody else is just being lying. Jeez. No. So we're still dribbling in. A few folks are in desperate search for caffeine, but otherwise, I think we're largely have something assembling a quorum here, or resembling, not us. All right. So if you didn't get the link to the HackMD, it's in the Slack channel.
We've also got the HackMD link inside the HackMD.
Yeah,
just to be a little recursive.
Writing people's names down. Jimmy Z, Sam Carter. Hero. Sebastian. Then. Now pronounce your last name for me, actually, Sebastian. Sting?
Spain.
Sting?
Spain.
Yeah, but the J fucks me up every time. Stain. Yep. They gave me a mic. Probably most useful then would be if I share desktop. Nope. Nope. Okay, so we get off to a rolling start. There's a few people in here that I might not actually. I know you. I just don't. Names with faces. Oh, you just put your name on there. Andrew Block. How many else names?
Max, hi.
Max?
We represent our colleagues from SAP. And
SAP?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because the colleagues are not able to join.
Yeah, good.
And my name's Hans.
Hans. Okay, who in here or online put on the first agenda? Because I'm almost wondering, even like Samuel's asked, if we have enough folks that present on the line, then we might even be able to tag or at least put something up for RC on these. Who wants to like cover this first topic? Actually, I'm not going to lead that.
I pretty much put all the topics there, but it's open if people want to go other directions. Cutting the new RC was a request. Sajay was asking that the other day. He's not able to make it to this, but he was asking, and I said that I'll bring it up to the group. And if we wanted to try to do that, I'm happy to open the issue, or someone else, whoever beats me.
Brandon, I got a question for you because I haven't been following this as closely as I wish I had. How close are we on agreement on everything in order to get a new release cut? Or is there still more disagreement that we need to work through first?
So I am surprised by this week, all the PRs that I had opened had been merged. So pleasantly surprised. And so that puts us in a pretty good place for a lot of getting that going. There are a few that have not been done. Trying to remember if it might have been Aaron that has a few open issues out there that he wanted to rebase on top of my PRs. I know VBatch, you had the one talking about the subject field on the index that we're a little bit back and forth on. And so those are still outstanding, and we still need to have something with the conformance test. So conformance test, my assumption was we can cut an RC, let people play with it for a while, work on the conformance test, and then cut another RC later on. I think I heard somebody say something too far from the mic.
Do you have a list of some of those ones that are outstanding?
I think we'd have to go through. What we have done is we've got the V1 milestones. So let me drop those links in. V1.1 milestones, and that has a bunch of the issues and everything linked in. So I'll drop those in here. One, and we got the other one for distribution spec. Drop in. There you go. I've tried to be good whenever we start talking about something to throw the 1.1 milestone on whatever the issue is, just so that we don't forget it. I may have missed some. Or that was Jason that tried to add the subject field to the index.
So do you think maybe what would be the most useful of this topic to see if these actually are something that we'd consider blockers for the 1.1 release?
So my thought process right now is
issues.
Yeah, my thought process right now, we've got a few that are outstanding as like open pull requests to work through. Not too many. We're getting pretty far along. My thought is that we would probably have a RC just to get this in front of people that are trying to write their code against it. The reason thinking of that is folks like Harbor have already done one of their releases against our RC. and we made a lot of changes. And so we want to try to get this visible to folks, knowing that things like adding conformance tests and other stuff is going to cause us to do another RC later on.
So should we just cut an RC then?
That is
Not
my
block
thought.
on these?
That is my thought. Yeah, not block and just get the RC out there. That was my thought.
I mean, because I think we're history otherwise, we used to usually only have maybe 6 or 7 RCs. So I think.
How long did it take before we had?
I mean, it's not run C. We're not comparing to the run C or RC cycle, but even of specs.
As long as you include the dot.
The dot.
Yeah, and the IC dot.
IC dot line. Yeah.
Oh, so otherwise it doesn't sort and dot 10 for the conclusion. RC 10 becomes lower than 1 for them to.
This was a problem with the
So everybody's still excited that we chose Semver, is what I'm hearing. That's what I'm hearing. All right.
Are there any bad things that you do in RC? I see how objecting against.
Probably worth speaking into the mic for people that aren't here, but.
Are there any bad things in doing an RC that we can expect? Other than just getting a new tag out, because I see no clear objection against doing so.
I think the only reason people were objecting before is we had a lot of very contentious open issues that are going to make big changes to the spec. I think we've gotten through most of those. So I'm comfortable pushing another RC out myself.
I think for image spec, we just have 2 maintainers on the call right now, right? Vincent, it's you and Brandon. So I think it's up to the 2 of you and then the rest of the maintainers whenever they come online.
I'm pretty sure we'll get an upvote from Sajay. And then we just have to do a little bit of wrangling to get some of the other maintainers on that.
Distribution we have. So let's keep one team and myself.
No objection. Also. No objection to cutting another RC. Yeah, let there be progress. It's the point of RCs. People can complain, then we can fix those things.
It definitely gets the attention out for things. People see that visibility when there's an RC and start actually making some code changes against it and complaining when something doesn't work. So that's beneficial to me. On the distribution spec side, I think a lot of the work we're looking at over there in terms of open issues or a 1.1 remain task, it's a lot of conformance. So I think getting that update is going to be a big step. I don't know how much time, Josh, you and I and other folks that might want to go through that.
Yeah, I'm just having trouble getting reviews. I put up number 401. Basically, we don't know when we're adding tests if they're gonna break registries, and so I added a thing in CI to test against SOT, which, if ZOT came out of conformance, we could write our own test registry, but they've been basically tracking all of the refs work. And this basically is like when we make a change to conformance in a PR, run it against ZOT and see if it fails, and then we can decide whether to take action.
I left a comment on the thread line 250, 225 on the file reviews we're looking at. The bytes equal, I think we want to make our conformance test strict. I think making our conformance test strict.
Yeah, so we talked about this last Thursday. My understanding was that we are going to be forgiving on that and basically saying do either, allow either.
What I thought we were agreeing to was that tools that are receiving data should be forgiving, but tools that are outputting should be very strict and explicit in what they're outputting. And so if we're making a conformance test, we're looking at the output of that tool.
What you're talking about is going to be in the .go file. Yeah, I guess I don't I don't really care. I guess if we do that though, every registry is going to be failing. And then what does conformance mean?
So what I was saying was that we'll go to the spec. So I think the spec is where all the existing implementations are today, not the HTTP spec, the distribution spec.
Yeah, I won't hold up a RC though with this, so I'm happy to basically just cut one today.
Yeah, I think I'm the one that added the broken line there in the first place, so I'm happy to get that changed the way it should have been, because I don't want to have a break in every registry either.
We could also just not check the header.
Could, is one less check in the conformance. And that's mostly Josh and I going back and forth, how the folks in the room or other people on the line feel on this one. And for those
I'm assuming there's no strong opinions. Basically, just to summarize, it's the range header that's returned from servers is missing the word bytes in front of it.
And it's missing it in our spec.
Well, basically the IETF says you must do that, but our spec doesn't. And I think Docker distribution basically didn't do that, and then so no one did that. And so all registries have this range header that is out of compliance with IETF, but works with all clients. So and our spec basically has a regular expression that doesn't include the bytes right now, so it'd be kind of a big change.
The direction I'm leaning is to make the conformance test align with the distribution spec, so make sure that the bytes equal is not in there. And that way all registries output the same thing. Clients should, and we can put this in the spec at some point, should accept either. But I think that what we want to have is registries must output the invalid.
Yeah, I'm fine with that. If I can get commitment from two people to merge this, I will make that change right now. I don't have a strong opinion. I don't know if the microphone's broken or if there's just crickets right now. But
no one's talking. I think the
stunned silence.
You're asking about two people. So I was looking at the maintainers file. That is Brandon and Vincent. Vincent, do you have an opinion on this?
Nope.
Would you click a green button?
I do like the color green. It's a nice color. So it's.
All right, I'm going to make the change.
Jimmy's here too, so. You also could click the green
Are we
button.
talking about 401, right? This is
We are.
401.
Yes. Yeah, my fear of leaving it either or is that it would mean that clients that are talking to an OCI registry wouldn't necessarily know what to expect. And so we could have a registry that outputs data that clients wouldn't process correctly. And then are we really being conformant in that case?
Josh, you said there's a breaking change though? This would basically break all the existing registries?
Brandon's suggesting don't break it.
Yeah.
There was just some conversation last week about we shouldn't be getting out of step with IETF.
Yeah,
stuff.
the reason all of us hate this is that it is in direct conflict with the IETF specs upstream from us. But that's our spec, not our conformance test, that's in conflict with it.
Yeah, I feel like we can't kind of return from what we've already created. So let's not break anyone. That's my feeling too. Yeah, cool. If that is the case, then there's nothing I object to here. I can press the green button if you'd like.
Give me just like 40 seconds.
All right.
Yeah. Once Josh cleans that up, you'll get my green button as well.
We should create a file that's like, these are all the things we need to break in the future, reserved to be broken.
That would be good. I'd like that.
Yeah. Yep.
I think a reserved list is a good idea.
Yeah.
If not a file, we can open up a new milestone of a 2.0 milestone, a bunch of issues of we'd love to fix this in the future.
Yeah. Oopsies.md.
Yeah. So how are the caffeine levels in the room this morning? People awake yet?
It's almost 3.
Yeah, it's almost 3 and it's a little low. I'm not gonna lie.
That's the American pass out.
Yeah, this is nap time. But... Okay. It's actually been a minute. I realized that I had no part in the last release, so I'm actually having to reread my own docs. So I probably should stop sharing the screen. But while I do that, but I can start readying to just at least propose the RCs to the process. And it looks like it still has the same process of proposing the vote or whatever, so we could get that ball started and all. But yeah, it's in the email and all that jazz. So it's not quite like it'll just cut today, but we could get that all started. So as you're working on that, I can be looking at the other. Sajay, I remember, graciously did the stuff last time. So
yeah, Sajay and myself did it. It was going through your documentation was helpful.
Well, that's nice. It doesn't. I'm not remembering having written any of this, so it's like reading it for the first time. It's good.
Jimmy and friends, that PR is ready for green button clicking. And I'd be happy to do the distribution spec side of it too, Vince. Are we saying do a RC on distribution too?
Yes, sir.
Is that going to be a long-term thing for us to do those in lockstep? I know the more recent changes have required it, but is this forever?
Not forever.
Add to the whoopsie doozy list how intertwined some of the things they are in between them, because I feel like there's certain things that are kind of coupled that will force that, but So effectively to move them would be a breaking change.
I would say it's possible that we can make a change to one and not the other, but there's also a lot of things that we get intertwined. And so it's not surprising we have to go together.
I think distribution's already one RC behind, right?
That was a different OC.
But yes, distribution is one RC behind.
Yeah, it was an RC behind because the first RC was missing a commit or something. Mistakes were made. RCs were cut. I feel like I want to hear about the runtime spec stuff. Do we want to move Akihiro up on the agenda?
So a runtime spec reached version 1.1 RC.2, and I think we can just freeze the main branch until we release version 1.1 GA. And so I think we can release the next RC in a couple of weeks, and I think we can release version 1.1 GA in May or maybe in June. And I also want to release RunC version 1.2 with OCI runtime spec version 1.1. And ideally, we should implement the entire spec, but maybe some tasks may take time, like implementing time namespaces, and other stuff may take time. So maybe RunC version 1.2 doesn't fully implement runtime spec version 1.1, maybe.
What was that about? Which maintainers? What was your last comment?
So runtime spec maintainers here are only me and Sebastian. Yeah. See.
Akihiro, what are the changes in runtime spec 1.1?
Mostly like official support for single version 2 and time namespaces, and you can check the change in the runtime spec repo.
And what was that?
You can check the change in the runtime spec repo. Thanks. Yeah, like official support for C group 2 and seccomp notify and risk 5 and ID mapping field for mount points. And seccomp enhancements, and in runtime spec version 1.1 RC2, we formalize the behavior of the RunC features command, which prints the JSON document for inspecting the build information of RANSI, like whether sequence is enabled or whether single bit is supported in this build. Like that. So most of the speaker is already implemented in RANSI, Ziran, and Yorki. Yeah, but yeah, time namespace is not implemented yet in RANSI.
Is that time namespacing that isn't implemented yet?
Yeah, time namespaces.
Okay.
So with recent client routine change the time of the container.
That needs new kernel functionality that it's already out though, right? Yeah.
All right.
So is there a plan to get that into RANSI in the near future?
Yeah, I think we can just merge it if somebody submits a pull request, but I don't see any pull request in the RANSI repo.
I have to go back and change all my Stack Overflow answers to say you can't change time in a container now. But I like this feature.
Andrew, was there a particular topic that you wanted? If you had OCI artifacts, OCI artifacts. This doesn't apply, right? If need be, that's a whole. I have a three. Okay. All right. Well, yeah. So we do have the room for like 2.5 hours, but that may hopefully not be needed. So we'll see. We might just all be staring at each other by that.
Next time, Amy needs little nap beds in the corner for people. I do have the other agenda item in there was just to think about future working group plans. I know I keep throwing it on there. I know I've got at least one of the issues out there right now. But at the same time, the authentication authorization, but at the same time, I feel like juggling more than one thing with this group is probably too much. And so I've been holding off on some of it, but thought I would throw it out there of things that are on our future agenda list, which directions we want to go, what things we want to get some collaboration on. One of those
goal. I was just going to ask, is the goal for the authenticity thing to document what everyone already does or to prescribe how everyone should do it in the future?
Bit of both. I think the biggest focus is going to start with what everybody does, but I do want to be a little bit prescriptive and try to not be too hard coded. And this is the way Docker does it. And so we're going to stick with just that way and kind of expand the focus a little bit to saying, how should we have done it? If there are any changes we want to make. But when I think about doing this stuff, I'm always thinking about compatibility. So I'm not going to propose something that's going to break everything, but it's more possibly just different workflows.
Is there a more general conversation around working groups and how to ensure their future success? That like how can they make progress, report back to the broader group, the actual maintainers of the different specs, and not end up in try to avoid a similar situation?
Good question. I'd love to hear the answer too. I think part of the challenge. It's just the working group is off doing their thing in their little isolation. You got a lot of people that are very focused on that same task. And then you bring it out to the big group, and there's invariably people that have different perspectives that weren't in the working group that give their perspectives after you've already done all the work.
I think one of the key things is that the governance structure we have right now is that each of the specs has a set group of maintainers. And each of the specs are effectively governed independently by those maintainers. So what we can do with a working group is provide a structure where people can collaborate on a proposal, but ultimately the maintainers of the specs or the projects are the people who are going to need to be on board with what the working group is producing. So I think one of the key things is for a successful working group to remain engaged with the OCI project or the OCI spec that you're targeting making changes to throughout the process, rather than just maybe coming to it at the end, like with a completed thing. Like, hey, we've been talking about things. This is what we've done for the past like 1-2 months. Here's our current thoughts. Here's where we've made trade-offs, and making sure that the maintainers stay involved with that, rather than, you know, at the end of it, we've put everything together. Here's our proposal. And if the maintainers have a different perspective that they feel like hasn't been addressed, then I think that's where we get this kind of conflict.
Without trying to offend anyone in the room, like that seems really obvious, and I don't understand why that didn't happen with the last working group. And so, like, either now if people are comfortable sharing that, or later over a beer if we can have a conversation about that, because otherwise we're not going to solve the problem and like, yeah, move forward. So
there's some things I probably want to save for over a beer. But there are other things that I will say that we did come forward to the group on a regular basis, give them updates and say, here's what's happening. We were doing our regular weekly meeting, give them input. And we had a lot of the maintainers in the working group as well. So that helped. Some of the biggest detractors that came up at the last minute were folks that were just out. They weren't available during the time that we were doing the working group development. So it was once they finally got back from paternity leave, they showed up, and then we found out that, oh, they had different opinions.
Not sure who Sleepy John is, but yeah, I would too. I think one of the challenges too has been with some of the specs, we've had a relatively small group of maintainers and a fairly high bar of requiring agreement for things to go forward to. So if we have a set of people that are maybe less active or not necessarily showing up to the weekly development meetings, like those are not really part of the governance, these weekly meetings. It's not required for anyone to show up. So if a working group is only using that as a medium to share, then maybe that's not sufficient to actually reach the set of maintainers that are decision makers for these specs.
Yeah, as someone that wasn't very involved in the last working group, but did come magically to the right meeting where everything was kind of explained at the end, it provided far more context that I would have been entirely lost without having. Yeah, I'm not sure how you make sure everyone gets that level of content and like that level of engagement. I was able to ask questions and actually understand. I mean, we do have recordings of all the calls. I wonder if we should just put at the top of a PR, you can't comment until you've read or watched this video, right? And fully actually understand kind of where everyone's coming from. I don't know how to enforce that. But yeah, I will say that going in, I had a completely different perception until the actual presentation from the working group. I'm not sure if that's just like the written content wasn't as articulate as the spoken content, or if the individual maintainers actually just need to have a verbal back and forth to like solidify their understandings before agreeing to anything. Yeah.
Another key thing that I think we need to figure out how to solve, and I don't know if there's a good way to solve it, is to get a lot more input and more implementations from people that are doing whatever the working group is proposing, so that we can see that there is agreement amongst the different registry providers and runtimes and different implementations, all the different tooling out there, to work out any of the kinks early rather than later on. I don't know how you do that though, because a lot of these groups just aren't involved until it shows up in an RC.
How do you think it would work best?
I was trying to go through the governance documentation, and I haven't found anything about removing maintainers if they're inactive. I'm way too new to this group to propose any sorts of governance changes, but I'm curious for thoughts on something like that.
I'll take a stab at this in my TOB chair with my TOB chair hat on. The charter for OCI grants very broad decision-making power to each of the individual projects and restricts the set of things that the TOB as a body that sort of governs all of the projects can take. So one of the things is the TOB does not control the maintainers, and the maintainers have control over the governance of their individual project within the OCI. So I think if we get to a point where there is a project that is deadlocked, that is out of the ability to make its own decisions, that's the point that the TOB can step in and potentially do something. But until that point, the TOB can't really mandate any particular rules around activity of maintainers or say that a particular project must adopt rules to remove inactive maintainers. So that sort of has to come up within the individual project itself. I think that if we get to a point where, or if one of the projects has a problem with activity, hopefully that's something that the existing maintainers or the community can suggest governance changes for that particular project.
I could suggest one of those right now. Being someone who is not incredibly accurate or active all the time on the distribution spec, but historically does have context. I know there are a couple other maintainers like this. We could have an emeritus role, because effectively we exist when there is a backwards compatibility or like a historical question, and that is where we provide the most value. But I am not day in and day out necessarily building out one of the primary registries, but I have built out part of the ecosystem around it. So I'm aware of a lot of intricacies and context there. So I think I still provide value, but not necessarily, I wouldn't find myself joining the next working group to flesh out something, maybe authn or authc, just because that actually is what I am working on these days. But yeah, I feel like that's definitely something that I don't know if the image spec shares this, but the distribution spec definitely has a lot of people that are historically have been involved and provide useful context, but are not actively the ones kind of participating in the meetings and proposing real changes and steps forward. They can definitely provide feedback on those proposals, but maybe not in a way that should be fully blocking. I think other people could then decide whether those things block moving forward.
I think if I want to take off my TOB chair hat for a second and speak just, personal opinion here, I think one of another path here is making sure that we have the ability to add people to the maintainers list, people that have been contributing and showing up and being active and participating in the community. Hopefully we can get a pathway to adding people as more maintainers there. And then some of the governance rules that we have around requiring majority or requiring 2/3 are easier to meet if we have more people involved.
I feel like we've kind of done that with the distribution spec and we're still here. Right.
I like the emeritus idea. I wouldn't mind getting out of people's way.
Yeah, we could always do both too.
Yeah.
Josh points out in the comments there, we've got the emeritus today.
Yeah,
already
we have the emeritus. They don't have any powers as far as like approvals. So we could make another group where they have a limited set of abilities, I guess. Yeah, because I think having historical context people around is helpful.
So outside of OCI, within the Containerd project, we recently adopted a governance change that relates to emeritus status, where people can move into an emeritus status and they're no longer included in the voting portions of things. But if they decide that they want to come back, it's a very easy path for them to come back and be maintainers, be committers again to the project. So that's one possible way that we could do something like this too.
I'm kind of saying it would be nice for them to have approval rights. I thought that's kind of what Jimmy was saying, but
I want to be able to rubber stamp and tell you guys that you're doing the right thing, but not necessarily block you guys from doing anything moving forward. So maybe that's like the gray rubber stamp, the one that isn't actually green on GitHub, right? So yeah, I don't know if that does mean having voting rights. I think like no one could cut a release without Vincent. So the emeritus is going to need something if Vincent wants it.
I guess I think part of the problem we're getting is like we can't get things merged because we can't get the non-emeritus people to look at things. I'm guilty myself of this, but I just wonder if having a broader, I don't know.
What if we made the granularity of what people own smaller? Like you own this portion of the spec rather than the whole thing. I feel like that might make it more friction, but then it might also mean you get pinged on more specific things.
Right, like code owners, specific
exactly.
code owners stuff, yeah. Putting my TOB hat on, I'm wondering if we can't get activity, like if we can't even get red X on PRs, like does it make sense to like give TOB the ability to step in after a certain period of time, like 30 days or something, giving them the ability to get changes in? Or is that, I know that that's not the current setup, but I typically trust, I'm biased here, but I trust the people on that list to kind of do the right thing.
I think the way that it works in the charter right now is someone can bring something to the TOB. So if I don't know that we need an automatic rule around the length of time, but if there is something that is stalled and the project can't work out a path forward, then someone can raise that issue to the TOB and the TOB can take action at that point. And I think that the TOB is already empowered if an issue is raised to do something like that. And it's a question of, do we want to raise an issue? And then we, as the TOB, can discuss it and figure out a path forward. It's just like the guidance in the charter is basically the TOB shouldn't do anything until there is a point when a project is effectively deadlocked.
So it sounds like the guidance here is get ourselves into a deadlock, and then we can escalate up and potentially propose a new governance.
I think the guidance is try not to deadlock, and then the TOB doesn't have to get involved.
That would be ideal, but things happen that we don't want to have.
I actually brought up the charter to be able to go like kind of read through this, and it's any cross, like, yes, Sam's right, being able to say like responsible for managing conflicts, violation procedures, guidelines. Yes, you can get deadlocked, but there's also a comment about high level issues that cannot be resolved in the TDC for OCI projects, and maybe we're there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I think if this is a high level issue that can't be resolved,
right, then
that's the point that the TOB can take action.
Yeah, and I think I want to be more clear that like it doesn't have to involve like a direct conflict. It just has to be like we need some direction in here.
Yeah, and I suspect what Sam is saying is we haven't gotten to the point that we haven't been able to get a release done. It's always painful. It involves going around and harassing people a bunch of times to try to get some of these RC, the RCs approved and whatnot. But until we get to the point that us going around and trying to get those approvals doesn't work, I think we're in a situation where we don't like it, but it's still functional.
So I think there's a difference as well between is no decision made, or didn't people read it? As to what is the deadlock? Is it just people didn't read it, or didn't they approve or reject? Maybe that is something more people should practice, as to, hey, I read it, but I need to make up my mind. Just leave a comment on the PR or whatever the issue is. And at times I've been TM and it was like, I read it, but I didn't like it. And I asked them, well, put it down there. Because then at least people know what's happening. What's the case? It's not just you didn't read it. It's just you didn't like it, or you have your doubts. So I don't know if there's any governance that can help with that other than leave a comment, spam us with your notifications.
I think the other thing, I want to go back to what Brandon was saying, that are we at the point where we are at a high level issue that can't be resolved? One of the prerogatives of the TOB chair is to decide if we're going to meet, or to call a meeting sort of unilaterally. I think you're right in characterizing that I don't think we're at the point where we're completely deadlocked. And so as the chair, I haven't called a TOB meeting because I don't know that it's necessary. But if other people want to, and we have that discussion, I'm happy to do that. Like, it's not only my decision as to whether we meet, it's just, I haven't unilaterally decided that we should meet and act on this. If other people in the TOB want to, like, more than happy to meet and talk about this and figure out if we need to do something. I just, like, my personal opinion is that I don't know that we need to yet. It feels like something that should be resolved within the individual projects.
Another idea that comes to mind is to just stir the pot enough that it gets the people that actually care downstream more involved.
I mean, I'm good at pushing stirring pots around.
Yeah, I mean, the other thing kind of like along those lines is I felt like actually the conformance tests build a lot more confidence, and you probably require less people to think about it, sit there and really think about the spec and figure out what it breaks if we actually just have automated testing everything. So I think that's done a lot in terms of the confidence of the project. Making that even more bulletproof always will help with progress moving forward. It's just how CI works.
I know that when I added the checks for chunked uploads, that got a little bit of attention from people. So the more of those, the merrier. It helps us find all the ragged edges.
So action items from this discussion.
EBS has distracted me. Apparently we have votes to make.
Okay, well, after the voting is done, Josh, I think you want the TOB to do something. I would like to hear if anyone else, either in the TDC or on the TOB, wants the TOB to take action. And if so, then we should get a meeting scheduled, and then we can talk about it. Right now, I know Josh wants this, but I don't know if anyone else does. So that's...
I felt more strongly about a month ago when it seemed like all hope was lost, but I feel better now. But I do fear we'll get into that situation again.
We found that it's possible. We found that it's possible, therefore.
Yeah, it sounds to me like we know this is possible, but we know what the action is to take when it happens, or we have a rough guidance of the direction we need to take, which is escalate to the TOC. And whether that's them taking unilateral action to remove maintainers or them working with us to change our governance, we can sort that out then.
At the risk of like bringing order to some of this, I didn't hear a timeline. Is that on purpose?
A timeline for how long until we escalate? Or because for me, it's a timeline of when it breaks, then we fix it.
When will you declare that it is broken? Is there a time that you would like 3 months, 6 months by the time that we get to KubeCon Paris? Which I don't know if the folks on the phone realized that, like, yes, Paris will be our next thing, but moving back, do you want to time box this, or are you more willing to frustration box it, really?
I think I would say I want to time box it around individual tag votes, because I think that's, or general trying to get PRs approved votes. If there's a call for maintainers and it takes more than a month, maybe it's worth saying, hey, we need a little bit of attention over here, and then sort it out at that point.
Josh, you had mentioned about a month ago you were more frustrated. Where will you be in a month from now? Standing in front of your desk? No.
Yeah, I'll be right here. No, I think like, we basically, it felt like we were ready for release in January, and now it's April. And so I would be very displeased if 1.1 on both of these specs didn't go out by the next KubeCon. Like that would be, that even seems like too long. I guess
that's early November.
That's a long time. Yeah.
Right.
Like I said, I think the current issue has been mostly resolved, and thank you everybody for hanging on with that. So my hope levels have gone up, but I would like to see like the TOB granted a little bit more powers when it comes to a gridlock situation. And I think we should just add some language in there that's like, in these rare instances, important issues haven't been looked at for 30 days, 60 days, things like that. I think they should have some more abilities there. And I'm not saying that because I'm a part of it. I'm saying it because like these things just get a little bit stagnant.
I was going to say, I also feel like the TOB should probably be more involved for the current set of changes because they do cross specs. A lot of the discussions we've been having actually impact multiple. So then that implies there needs to be higher level decision making outside of the scope of an individual spec. So maybe that fundamentally should bring in the TOB regardless of any timeline.
Yeah, and that was when I sent an email about a while ago, like that was kind of my point, is that issue 999, it was, I don't know, that was pretty, that to me, that indicated triggering that language in the TOB charter. But it's kind of like lawyer stuff, like what is the meaning of the law? Like that was my interpretation of it. But I'm talking about like giving them GitHub powers versus like just these kind of I would like to see like actionable actions being taken in the repos versus conversations being had. We have a lot of conversations.
We all know you just want to force push over the spec, Josh.
I'm forking the spec.
I think I'm a little confused, or I'm trying to figure out exactly what you want the TOB to do. And so maybe that's the question is like, what is the concrete proposal? Because I think that, to your point, you want the TOB to be able to take action when there is conflict. I think that the existing language gives the TOB the ability to do that. And it's just a question of, as the TOB, do we want to exercise that power?
Right, and I think like, I guess let me pull up the list of TOB. Like I said, I trust the people on that list to act in good faith. And I don't think that powers should be taken lightly. And I think only in situations like the 999 and some of the stuff in the last few months should that be taken. But I'm saying like concretely putting anyone on TOB into some GitHub group or GitHub team that does have the ability to approve, not like bypass the need for approvals, but like the ability to put a green check on things. I don't know.
So are you suggesting that the TOB should be a set of like super maintainers that override the like votes of an individual project?
Yes, but maybe there's some process around that, like that you can't use that until it's been raised or something.
Do you want to be super maintainers, or do you just want to be additional votes for the individual spec? So if there's a deadlock situation, someone from the TOB can come in and be like, here's one more green check mark or one more like red mark.
This almost seems like a little bit like the tag or whatever structure, SIG structure, where you have like, here's the maintainers, but here's like the people that are involved from the SIG that can like drive by and be involved. Like if decisions are had, they should be involved. Some of the Kubernetes files that show like some project network proxy, you know, and then here's the maintainers, but Tim Allclair can like drive by because he's in the overarching group.
Yeah, I don't know how to like put in controls that you couldn't use that. Like, I'm not really worried about it, but consider like, let's say if that happened, I don't have access to image spec and then a PR comes up that I like and I approve it, like that would be an abuse of that power. And so I think there needs to be some an email sent to the TOB, like, please intervene. And I just think we should put in some language that allows like this backdoor to prevent that type of situation that we'll hopefully never have to use. But I want to I want to reiterate that I do feel very hopeful once again about OCI's ability to release something. So maybe there's nothing to do here. I just think a little language in TOB charter would go a long way. And I don't think you'd get a lot of pushback from the maintainers of the specs either. And I don't really know that this applies to runtime spec either. It's very much the other two.
I think I would be. I'm interested in understand. I think I'm still confused. I'm interested in understanding more of like what is the language that you want added to the charter to grant the TOB more power. Because in my understanding of the charter is that if we have an exceptional situation, the TOB basically can do what we need to do. And then it is the question of determining, are we in that situation? And then what is the action that we need to do? So like that action could be, hey, we want to like figure out how to approve or reject something, although I would very much not want to do that because the TOB shouldn't really, at least in my opinion, I don't think the TOB is a group of super maintainers. But like the actions that the TOB can take are things like adjusting the set of maintainers if we have to.
I will respond to your question. First of all, I want to say that this is, I don't know who brought up this topic, but this is not my topic, so we can just stop talking. But
you're on point now, pal. No.
I would like to say something in response to your question that I hope doesn't come off offensive to anyone, but what has the TOB done in the last since I've been here? I like honestly,
almost
like
nothing.
I don't.
So,
right.
No, I don't think that's offensive, and I think almost nothing is right. And at least from my perspective as a TOB member and the TOB chair, is kind of the right thing for the TOB to do. Like it's not meant to be this heavyweight board that is overseeing all of the activities of the project. It's mostly like, how do we serve as a point for conflict resolution, serve as a point for deciding that a new project is going to be there, serving as a point for deciding if a new working group is going to be accepted. Kind of that's about it. Like the goal that's laid out in the charter is for each of the projects to be pretty much independent. And so the TOB doing almost nothing, in my opinion, is a good thing.
I agree with you. And sorry, go ahead.
I think that's slightly in conflict with some of the sentiment I've heard from individuals. And I don't know if they represent large love. Like there is a desire of the quote unquote industry to move in a direction of the combination of all of these specs, and who is responsible for shepherding that vision and strategy and the direction. If this was a company, there would be a group of people, a product manager or director, or like someone responsible for helping enable that. And so I'd be curious of like the group's thoughts of like, how do we get to some of like, is that just not part of what OCI wants to do? Should there be a different group that determines some of the future things?
I don't want to dominate this, but I have some thoughts here. So I'll speak, and then I'm going to try to not pick up the mic again for a little bit. The OCI is interesting. It is an industry consortium, but the way that the governance is designed is that OCI members, which are the member companies that pay for a membership in the foundation, have the ability to nominate and vote on up to 5 seats of the 9-member TOB. And the other 4 seats are nominated by the maintainers of the projects and voted on by the maintainers of the projects. So this is a, in some sense, it is industry dominated in that there's 5 versus 4. And so there's a majority of industry seats, of which I am one. But on the other hand, we're not electing the companies, we're electing individuals. And so when I changed employers, I didn't lose my seat on the TOB. With all of that said, like as a TOB member, I represent, at least the way that I look at it, both my employer's interests, but also the interests of the community here, or at least I try to. And it's not my personal goal to like push a particular direction on the community. If I can do something to help with that, I absolutely want to. Like if there is something that the community wants to do, like I think references and artifacts are really interesting. And if I can do something in the TOB to help with that, I want to, but I also don't want to be here stepping on anyone's toes and throwing my weight around. Like that is an anti-goal of mine. Yeah, okay, I'm gonna put down the mic. Hopefully other people can share their thoughts too.
I just want to echo what you said. A lot of the things that we've talked about for a like quote unquote V2 of the spec requires things moving across different specs. If there's no higher level organization for that, that's just impossible. And these are things that we have to do eventually. So something has to happen where either all the maintainers get together or there is some higher level body to actually be able to reorganize across specs. I don't know if that looks like the TOB, but it needs to be something if we're going to address legacy and create a V2.
Let's say something. Yeah, go ahead, Brecken.
Well, we've got some of the TOB here. Assuming we hadn't resolved the technical issues around the 1.1 release, do you think you had the powers to be able to resolve it for us? Do you have an idea of what you would have done if we were still deadlocked technically?
Yeah, because at some point, I mean, there was a little bit of a feeding frenzy and blood in the water when there was like proposing, pulling some maintainers off because it was like you needed 2/3. And that's like, there's a few of those things that like I'm both glad we did do, and it's a pain in the ass that we did do, like 2/3 majority for certain kinds of votes to go through. And then if we're just like, what is the path to maintainer? That's been a popular question. Like, how does somebody get involved enough to when it's just like you're in, and it's not just like same folks over and over? Like, how do you do that? So like at some point when it was like propose these people who aren't maintainers anymore be off, and there's constantly this tension of like, yeah, the people who are involved in the community, but the companies that want to stay involved. And so like I'll call it out, like, yeah, Brendan Burns was not active anymore. He didn't need to be a maintainer anymore. And so it was like, cool. But Microsoft wanted to stay represented. And at that time, Steve Lasker was very involved. And so it was like, cool, let's just like do this little hat trick of like somebody who's actually involved. And that's like triggered a whole other subset of conversations. And like, it's like, so what's the right way to do that? Is there a graduation process? And there is a little bit of that of like moving companies staying, but then thankfully there's also some verbiage about like not too many people from the same company involved. So like even when like Red Hat acquired CoreOS, then it was suddenly like Red Hat had several people. So one of you needs to get out of here because that's too much. You could actually swing a vote. And so like there's some guidance, and I appreciate it, but it's usually just kind of like making sure that we could do that. So what would we have done? If we truly were deadlocked, I'm pretty sure it would not. I don't doubt that we would actually step up and be like, actually, some of these people need to leave, and the nomination process will be different, not a hat trick of just dropping in somebody else. but actually like, let's look at some stats of like who all's been involved. Are they mostly commenting and involved in the calls, or are they actually proposing commits or reviews? You know, and do a little bit of qualitative look at that. I don't doubt that we would dislodge something like being able to have enough active maintainers that we can get involved. And that's probably one of those, in all honesty, it's probably now that things are actually moving again and our Dulitsky meter is like, okay, right now, this is probably a better time to propose some of that of like, hey, looking at this maintainer, they've actually not been involved at all. It's like the pressure and the temperature is low right now. It's probably the worst time to do that when the pressure's high, because then it's going to really make some contentious conversations. So in all honesty, probably right now, taking a look at who are the least active maintainers and like proposing that and maybe some nominations, like right now is probably the best time to do that, not when we're blocked again. That's probably the worst time every time. But I don't doubt that we'll have the mechanisms and the conversations and pulling people out of the woodworks if they haven't been around in a while. Even like John Bull, he admits that he's not active and involved, but he's still somewhat in the space, and he's basically emeritus. Like he could show up and say, yeah, that wasn't ever the intention, but he's not involved. It's basically a rubber stamp. And he's acknowledged that, like, he doesn't want to be blocking anything, but he's happy to, be pulled out of the woodwork for his opinion. So I'm pretty sure we have all the mechanisms to dislodge ourselves. Yeah, now we got a couple more hands.
Yeah, I think I was up first. I just want to respond a little bit. I think the questions that are being raised are coming out of stuff like 999 when that showed up, and then how long we took to finally work through that process. It was long, it was painful, but at the same time, if I look at on any individual week, there was some progress being made every week, and some back steps in the middle there as well. But overall, I don't think we were ever deadlocked. It was just painfully slow. And so that kind of raises the question of how far are we on that broken scale? Have we reached that point that the TOB or TOB would need to step in and do something about it? And I don't think we crossed that threshold as a TOB member. I agree it was painfully slow, but I don't think we ever crossed that threshold where we weren't making progress.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I didn't want to suggest that we were deadlocked. I think that the last minute changes timing was unfortunate, but they were entirely necessary. And I'm happy to hear that the actions that we have in our hands respect the technical input of the people who are still involved. I think that's the most important bit.
Oh, cool. Hi, Mike Brown here. Just like to say, I think the work group process is working pretty good. And that really is what the process is, at least as I see it, for when we have conflicts or when we need to make changes in both the distribution and the image spec, right? And or the runtime spec. These work groups can work. They've been shown to work. The output is expected to go to the maintainers and then to be churned a little bit, and that can be frustrating. Perhaps we can keep the work group open for long enough until the specifications that they proposed get merged and included in a release, okay? We might have closed the work group a little too fast, in my opinion, and that might have slowed down the progress. But I think the output was a pretty good job. And for the most part, even after 999 went in, as far as I can tell, all the features that were requested and required by the work group are being implemented, if not this exact same way as proposed. Hand down.
HackMD is not acting right.
It is being a little stuttery. But I did go through and change the groupings there because I don't think we were on a working group discussion anymore. So I was just separating out that we're talking about TOB stuff now.
So maybe as a transition to the working group conversation, or a separate like segue of like, is any of this easier if looking at the set of proposed working groups, those things are optional or extensions to the specifications? Like, do we end up in a situation where overall the set of specifications and implementations are diverging, or is that like diverging in a way that's viewed negatively versus an intentional direction?
I just wanted to clarify, was that a question that is like the pros and cons of having things be optional? Would that like free up opportunity for progress? Was that the point?
Yeah, like the artifact manifest is one of the proposed working groups. So like, do you make a registry or distribution support for the idea of an artifact completely optional, in which case you have a divergence in conformance maybe, or it's not because the conformance would be you don't have to implement it. And is this like a broader pattern of there's many things we need to address that should be part of the specification, or like should we start diverging more?
Yeah, I feel like that's still a case by case basis, because obviously you can think of certain things that I would consider core. Like I think the auth and auth stuff is relatively core. There's very little use in a lot of these registries without logging in and having access control. Yeah, I'm a little biased very early into the artifact stuff. I was kind of more on the side of OCI, the container spec. It has the C word in it. So maybe like it needs to be loose enough that like you can have the freedom for the other quote unquote extensions or specifications, but we can focus on making sure that the container workflow is both well defined enough to function, but then has holes cut out to enable optional functionality. I think the argument around kind of like adding optional functionality and like, will that fracture registries, is one that we can only really have with maintainers of those registries. I feel like even something like artifacts, a lot of people are on board with enough that you can call it optional, but everyone's going to expect it to be required at least. But I don't want to be in this compatibility hell where there's 100 different features that are optional, and you still can't rely on what things are there. I think Vivats, you had presented something that was kind of like a feature discovery endpoint really far back in the day, for some context to try to help with some of that stuff. Yeah, I do think that like having some of these working groups maybe ship things as optional features for a while before it gets kind of pulled in and made required is also another route. That feels very much so just like telling folks, hey, implement this first before it's allowed to be something that we actually ever make required. Like prove it first in code, like in real usage. Give your hand up.
Yeah, I was going to point out that if you look at the actual conformance as it is today, I think there are a lot of people that assume that it does a lot more than it really does. And so, for example, there are flags in there that you can turn off testing of polls, testing of content discovery. You can disable a lot of these features that people just assume is included in every single OCI registry. And the second part is that the conformance is only on the distribution spec, not on the image spec. And so we can add a whole lot of new kinds of data objects, but how we test that they're used is a whole different spec. And so it gets into a very awkward situation. So something to keep in mind that what we've done mostly in distribution spec is testing, hey, can we push these objects up there, pull them down if you set the flag? And if you don't set the flag, we don't even test that. And then what those objects are, that opens up a whole other can of worms. And to say auth covers all, I would say the ttl.sh is out there giving a no auth registry to everybody that wants to push up content. So there are registries out there that don't care about auth.
That is true. Yeah.
Just to key off something that you just said, do we want conformance to cover any of the other specs too?
We wanted it forever.
Yeah.
There's a whole certification working group that was most of the business. They've wanted that forever. There was a whole certification working group that was probably one of the more corporate-y smelling periods, because it was all the companies involved that wanted to make sure that their involvement was actually like could get a little green check mark, and that ultimately went nowhere. I mean, if it did, it wasn't. None of the maintainers were aware of where that went.
It's also only on the server. It doesn't test clients that are talking to servers. So that was another part of the space that I thought would be interesting if we could ever try to figure out how to solve, but I don't know how you solve it. Because every client's can be completely different. I don't know how you write a test for that.
Arguably, also the runtime tools and image tools repos were somewhat with that intention, and that went off the rails too, because there was not a lot of active overlap between maintainers of tools and those libraries that would have done that exact conformance and the people in the specs. So I think we'd even looked at archiving those, because it really was never, like there was active, but it wasn't a parity, and I don't know, like it was never strictly held together. It was just like more maintainer spread. And now I think some of the libraries are used, so they're not going to be archived, but that was one of the goals of those projects that I think maybe wasn't expressed or required enough.
Wonder if that's something we should like restart.
Dust off.
Yeah. If there's any interest in that from anyone volunteering to do it.
Yeah, when I look at a lot of this stuff, there's things I'd love to see done, but it dramatically overlaps with things I just don't see how you could ever do it.
I think the the 1.1 is an interesting time to revisit, because you would then have registries saying, like kind of showing off that I support these new APIs. But as far as like the certification program, I wasn't there for the beginning of when that started. But the way that I understood it was break it down by spec, starting with distribution spec, and get towards a place of like offering companies some sort of badge that says we're distribution spec 1.x qualified, and then they could put that on their website or something like that. But that gets into, I think, Amy realm.
The carrot or the stick, you either give them a sticker that says, hey, you did it, or you break something. And then when they freak out, you say, well, the way you find out about these changes to not be broken is to integrate with the conformance suite.
Right.
Yeah, today
I like to advocate for chaos, so maybe we should start breaking things, because I feel like we have been very considerate in the past, and as a result, everything's very quiet.
Mike, I feel like you're trying to say something.
Do not break the spec. Oh my gosh. In a very big way, we made a decision earlier on to allow the users of our specifications to be the testing end. Okay. And I think that's been fairly successful with the container runtimes, the runtime engines, and the registries that they integrate with. Okay. Got to remember the origins here, right? OCI's intention has and always will be, hopefully, to make sure that customers can use OCI-enabled tooling to pull images, now artifacts also, right? And have some confidence that they can move from one platform to the next as long as that platform is OCI compliant. Okay, and the only way to make that happen is to have end-to-end integration tests in Kubernetes, end-to-end integration tests in each of the container runtimes, in CRI tools, right? And run C provides buckets of tests as well, and crun and runs the similar buckets and is enabled by the container runtimes. The integration is pretty large, and without that large integration, you're not going to find all the holes. And even when we do, making sure that when OCI actually does release the 1.1 specifications, we're going to have a cycle where that's going to be in an alpha or a beta kind of format until we've gotten enough implementers that are actually importing that specification in the Golang, versions and testing and all that right? And back down.
Have we beaten that dead horse enough?
I think so, yeah.
The other question I had on the agenda was to look at where do we want to go next in the working group? And so not necessarily saying kick this off right now, but in terms of knowing that trying to juggle multiple things amongst this team is challenging enough as we have a hard time doing just one thing at a time. Is there a direction in terms of the next working group we want to see spun up? And I've got a few sitting out there. Artifact Manifest, I think, is probably the most confrontational, but the one that we kind of promised to do. Authentication authorization, I brought up last time we had a meeting like this, and it's sitting out there in the TRB. We got a few people that are interested in doing it, but I don't think we have any votes in the TRB to actually go through, and if we got that motivation quite yet. The other one I want to throw out there was the tag API. I think a lot of people have said they want to see more than just a list of tags when they query the tag API. They want to see things like digests. They want to see full descriptors. They'd like to see untag manifest somehow. And I see Sam throwing out there FreeBSD. So there's other groups out there we might want to consider as well. So any preferences in terms of the people that will be interested in helping out with this stuff, which direction we want to see going next?
I feel like if we keep going with the artifact stuff, we're going to end up having these same discussions. Be right back to the cross-cutting changes across specs and all of the conflict we've already been dealing with. So it almost seems like do you want to kick that can down the road, or should we just all start addressing it right now and try to get it out of the way?
It's definitely going to be painful, but it's also fresh in the mind. So there's value each way of saying kick it down the road because it's going to take a while to get consensus, but do it now because this is when all of us have been thinking about a whole lot and when people still want to see it. So there's value each way that one.
Do you mind if we touch on artifacts for just a minute? Because earlier Andrew was here and then he left and now he's back. And while you're here.
Yep, thanks, Vincent. So Andy Block with Red Hat. I presented last week with a number of folks, Scott Rigsby and a couple others, on artifacts and OCI. And I wanted to provide an update because we talked about some of the efforts that would be starting in tag app delivery in the CNCF around managing artifacts in OCI. So I met yesterday with their group. I wanted to share some of the updates that came out of that just for everyone's visibility. They were very receptive of the proposal for starting up a new working group inside tag app delivery. So we want to be able to define what our charter is. We're just working through that process, getting that solidified. We'll then eventually go and get merged into a PR to at least define exactly what we're going to start working on in terms of managing content, managing artifacts, and OCI is certainly kind of the place we're going to start because, like all the challenges that we've had, it's always hard to start with just one thing. And considering there's a lot of interest around OCI right now, we're going to start with OCI integration for artifacts and everything you want to do with OCI artifacts. One area in particular that we're very much interested in is searching artifacts, because right now there is no good way to search artifacts whatsoever. You have some high-level constructs for on refers, but that's about it. And even that's not fully GA yet. So we're going to start looking at that in the coming weeks. And really my goal here was just to kind of make everyone aware of that and to welcome you to please come join us, because we want to get everyone's insight, because we're all just kind of trying the best that we can. And we've done a lot of good work here in the OCI working group on artifacts in the past. So bringing in your knowledge and helping the community. So that's really, I just wanted to share that update. Thanks.
So I don't know if you'll be able to answer this. I think I've asked it before, but I'll ask it again, which is when we're talking about artifact discovery. And if we get outside of artifact discovery, I'd love to regroup and talk about that again, because I want to make sure we don't spread this into areas other people are working on already. But if we're talking about artifact discovery, are we talking about discovery of an artifact that is associated with an existing manifest out there, existing image, something like that, in terms of discovering signatures and SBOM, stuff like that attached to an image? Are we talking about discovery of artifacts within a single repository? Or are we talking about discovery of artifacts across multiple repositories in a registry?
And I brought that exact same question because if it's a single artifact OCI registry or multiple, and I think it's multiple, but we might just start with one because it's easier. It's going to be hard to kind of go across boundaries potentially across multiple OCI registries. I don't want to say it's not possible because I'm pretty sure it is. I brought that conversation up in the ORIS community. So, and they said it was possible. So, yeah.
I didn't even go that far. Multiple registries would be a whole bunch of chaos that I think we would
exactly
worlds would explode within a single registry, within a single repository, or something attached to an individual image.
Yeah, I think we're going to go across. Is my
multiple repositories. Okay.
Yeah. I always get registries and repositories. They're so stinking similar.
You would not be the first.
Or the last. So we did share last week a lot of some documentation to that proposal and some of the areas that we're starting. So look at last week's agenda. You'll see where we started, and if you want, you can always grab the recording as well, or the meeting notes.
Pull that up.
We definitely look to provide updates to this group as we go along. Everyone might not be able to join any of the initiatives, but we at least want to keep everyone informed. Thanks.
As we go across multiple repositories, the area I think I brought up before was going to be authentication when we get into that question. And so that might be something that pushes us to move that working group earlier to get some authentication definitions defined within the specs.
Yep, agreed.
For authentication, so you mentioned you wanted to take the existing implementation as a starting point. Would it help to move that content to a repo in the open containers org?
I don't know if it's going to be move, recreate, or create fresh, but something along those lines, yes.
Yeah.
Is that currently still in Mobi, or is that in distribution?
It's in distribution, but it's a bit of a weird situation as to there's the old content there that's basically migrated to the OCI, and it's confusing everyone.
Yeah. Because I remember trying to look at some. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So we need to have a look at that altogether. But I was wondering as to, do you need that content, and do we need to make that official as to it's a copy and it's a starting point?
I think there's also some documentation on various Docker web pages that I go to a lot for some of this. So it's spread around a few places.
I know. Yeah.
No, not a complaint. Just making sure that we know we got to find this in a lot of places, and that whatever we create shouldn't break anybody that followed different places.
No, it's just that Sebastian probably wrote it. He just feels this. No.
No, someone copied it and I moved it back, but I didn't remove it from where it was copied to. Yeah.
Hey, I'm probably supposed to be helping merge those commits, so it's half my fault too.
So of the 4 listed, was there any of those 4 that you had a personal preference to have prioritized?
And the challenge is I want to do everything at once, but I know.
I mean, you brought up 4, so now I'm interested as to, is there one you had in mind you were waiting for, or you're interested in to see moving? Because I know there's some work happening on authentication on the Docker side. I don't know if it's directly involved into the specs or whatsoever, but I could check if there's people interested in participating. But I know it's contentious, the whole authentication part, that it's complicated. So
as someone that's written some of this stuff and looked at other implementations, yes, fully agree. So that one's already sitting out there. We've got stuff out there. We've got people that are ready to go. So authentication, authorization, I think that is up on a list of things that we could probably start quicker than others. I just know that if we do that, there might be some people that are upset that said, hey, you told us you were going to do artifacts. And perhaps this is one of those scenarios where we juggle and do 2 things at once.
Just to call, this is exactly why I wanted to have the previous conversation, because we're right back with artifacts where we were before. So we don't need to make any decisions about that now, but it seems like something is still broken there.
Yeah, I don't know if it's broken to the point that I want to get TOB involved. It is contentious, for sure. And it's going to take a while to get some of that contention worked out.
I think a lot of this stuff will take time, so start now. No time like the present. Especially like, I think the auth and auth stuff, at least we know what the starting place is too, and there is some legwork that has to be done there. So let's do things in parallel. I don't think there's going to be a lot of contention around kind of gathering up what exists today and documenting that. So I feel like that can definitely be done with minimal conflict while also working on the artifact stuff.
The other question I'll throw back is, does an upgraded tag API need to be a working group, or should that just be something done directly within distribution specs? It's only a single spec. Is it big enough that people want to see that broken out?
So as Andrew is packing up and leaving, I'm going to quickly ask the question of, like, what's the difference between the proposed working groups for Artifact, Manifest, Tag API, and the work that is being proposed by the Tag App Delivery? it's not clear to me which is the same and which is different, and how we ensure that as that work progresses, if we're intending for the result of that work to go into the spec, we should let them know now.
The tag API would have been a single repository. So I don't think that's going to be something that touches. And that's why I was asking the questions. I wanted to see where we were overlapping, where we weren't. And so I feel like that one is not going to conflict, but the authorization authentication, when you start talking about stuff that needs to go across multiple repositories, would.
Andrew said that'll work. So it sounds good.
Cool. Sam, do we need to talk about FreeBSD? Not need, want.
The only reason I put that on there was, I think a lot of people know this, that I was messing around with a FreeBSD runtime in my not very much spare time. And I don't know if anyone else was interested in trying to think about what possible changes we would make to the runtime spec for it. We've got some Linux specific sections in the runtime spec and some Windows specific sections. And there are some things about how FreeBSD handles jails that are different. And if anyone was interested in thinking about that with me, then maybe we can put together a working group, but I don't have a concrete proposal here yet. So yeah, this is more of a just asking if anyone else is interested.
I haven't looked into this subject in a couple of years, so I kind of wonder what the state of the art is there. I feel like when I think about what it was like IO Cage back in the day. I don't know if there's any, I know Jetpack existed for a short amount of time, but I don't know if that project lives on or if anyone in FreeBSD is actually trying to use OCI yet, or would this be starting that from scratch?
So IO Cage is still around. I think people are using it. I don't know a ton about it. I had messed around with just building a runtime, and so I have a runtime that works and starts jails, and then can be used with Containerd. And there has seemed to be some interest from the FreeBSD community on that. There's a FreeBSD channel on the OCI Slack with some people in it, and some conversation that happens there. But I know some of them would be interested in a working group. I didn't know if anyone else that's already in the OCI community would be interested in that too.
From my perspective, I feel like most of that work is on the runtime. Maybe there's very little just to add it as like a platform or something like that in manifests, right? But other than that, I feel like everything else would kind of be like runtime changes.
Yeah, I think the reason that I was thinking about this as a working group rather than just contributions to the runtime spec was to see if we could have agreement over what the set of additions for FreeBSD would look like to the runtime spec, rather than trying to do it piecemeal. That was why I was thinking maybe a working group might be worthwhile. But yeah, this is just trying to gauge interest. So.
I'm just saying the fun side of things, hacking on things that aren't in the critical path yet. And then suddenly. Amy, could we just redeem the rest of the time in red wine?
You can also throw the chaos grenade out there.
If we're done, we're done. Get back to work.
Dude,
Are there other particular pressing questions though that folks joined that wanted to hear surfaced? I mean, if you didn't add it to the agenda, but I mean,
it wasn't on the agenda, but the chaos grenade is: do we want to update the index with the artifact type and the subject field? The question that I threw out last week, VBAT, you weren't there. Do we have an actual example, an implementation that shows that they need this. The chaos grenade just kill everybody in the room. Not supposed to do that.
I think you should save that for next time. That's what I think. I think people, I'm looking around the room going like, oh man, everybody's like, we're a little done
Caffeine
here.
buzz wore off.
Yeah, well, yeah, you know, there was some afternoon coffee, but I think we don't probably have the right people in the room for that as well. Or VBAT's just staring at me, just done. Okay.
I mean, it's probably a fine topic. Maybe it's just not where my brain is. I think some of the stuff is just like having high throughput synchronous things, like even just getting a vote for the RC up and some other conversations and some things even of like, what do you do here? Kind of good face-to-face questions. That's one of the things that I like these in-person meetings for, because the calls are good and we definitely tend to find a way to fill the whole time. But there is something about the in-person where you can ask sometimes even the same question and it's less contentious, or it's just a little bit more real. So honestly, like I like the high bandwidth questions. So I don't, in me even like joking about ending, early if we don't use the whole time. It's just to kind of like pay heed to, I think we've already had some good discussions here. Maybe some progress made and at least getting on the same page. And yeah, not just to wear it out for the sake of wearing it out.
To that end, I have two different kind of meeting agenda items to bring up. Do we want to be able to meet next week, or are people traveling back? And that's also for the folks on the phone. Do you want to keep the call for 27th?
There is a Metallica concert next week here, so
there's a very large Metallica concert here next week.
And
None of the rest of us will be here, right?
The orange, what is it? What do they call it? When everybody wears orange?
King's Day.
Is that just King's Day?
King's Day and Metallica, perfect combination.
Yeah,
clearly. Okay. I saw some thumbs up from the Zoom room. It sounds like being able to keep the 27th is perfectly fine. I think our next in-person that I can track towards is KubeCon Chicago in November.
Nothing at Open Source Summit Vancouver.
Oh, Open Source Summit Vancouver. That's so soon though. I'm gonna leave Vancouver alone. I'm gonna track towards being able to like get the pieces together for Chicago. Fair? Complain at me if you want something in Vancouver too.
That's fine. Maybe even if we just do a small social or something like that. I know we've done that in the past.
Get a lunch table. It'll be fine.
Yeah, people are hanging out. Some of us will be there. Or if we have budget to go grab beers.
We can find budget. All is fine. All right. Brandon, do you have any other bombs to be able to throw out into the...
I was just going to say, make sure to tip the host, Amy. You've done such a good job taking care of us. If folks have extra drink tickets, hook her up.
All is well. All is well. It's going to be a lovely night. We have like the parties all together tonight. Yes, you have the mic. You have it.
Oh yeah, I just want to say one last parting word, which is I went to the WASM Day on the first day, and Kelsey Hightower gave the introduction. And one of the things he talked about for them being successful is nobody has any idea what they've done. Everybody here in this group is, to me, famous. Like you've been working on this stuff for a long time. I've been following Docker from early days and in the beginning of containers. Now I have the luxury and the joy of being able to do it and get paid. And if this group messes up, in my view, it would break the internet. And I see the effort and work put into ensuring that doesn't happen. And that's awesome. So even if nobody else says thank you, I will say thank you to everybody.
And that is a lovely place to be able to leave it as well. So thank you all. We'll see you online. Online is shorter.
Thanks for joining online.
Thanks for
Cheers,
hosting, Amy.